Welcome one and all to my channel, Sermon Time. I'm your host, Pastor Tony, and I am thrilled you made it your way here. Many of you have been following this series of messages taken from a Bible lands tour my wife and I took this spring to Egypt, Jordan, and Israel. So far, each of the messages have been coming out of our time spent in Israel. In later presentations, we will get to other parts of our tour. Our tour today takes us to Jerusalem, to a stretch of ancient road spanning 3/8 of a mile, where Jesus performed one of his most extraordinary miracles, healing a blind man when he wasn't even in his presence. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself now, aren't I? Today's message, part 9 of our series, is called Jesus Breaks the Sabbath. In our trip to Israel, a great deal of anxiety was created over the news we were going to visit and walk through Hezekiah's tunnel. Hezekiah's tunnel is narrow-walled, low-ceilinged, and over 1/3 of a mile long. This gave some in our group the claustrophobic willies. To make matters worse, we would be in fast-moving, waist-high water for part of this trek. Those fearing tightly enclosed spaces opted to meet up with us at the other end of the tunnel. Those okay with the cramped space but not so keen on the waist-high water opted to walk through the dry tunnel, which was a naturally occurring tunnel nearby. Hezekiah's tunnel was made under the reign and at the direction of King Hezekiah in the 7th century BC. It cut through solid rock in an attempt to get water from its source outside the city limits to a location inside safe from enemy attack. One of the most amazing things about this tunnel was there were 2 teams of workers. One team worked from the northern point of origin at the Gihon Spring, and the other team worked from the terminus in the south at the Pool of Siloam and headed north. The 2 teams met in the middle at the meeting point. You can see how perfectly straight these tunnels were. Just kidding. Here's a short video of our journey through the tunnel to give you a sense of what we went through as we walked through the water.
So we've done at least 400 feet, and there's just no end. So it just keeps going. It's going. We are in Hezekiah's tunnel. We're in mid-calf deep water after the mid-thigh one we started with. And we have crossed the halfway point where the 2 directions of the tunnel diggers met. And it just keeps going.
When we emerged from the tunnel, we were delighted and surprised to find it ended at the Pool of Siloam. This is what the excavation site looks like today. But back in the day, this picture here depicts what it once looked like. Currently, the site is under expansive reconstruction. It was here that a lot of earth was being removed and taken to an archaeological sifting site across the Kidron Valley. We visited that site on the Mount of Olives, and several teams were created to help sift through some of the debris from the Pool of Siloam. Our team found something very remarkable that dated back 2,600 years to the time of King Hezekiah. But that story I will save for another time. Today we're going to take up a story of Jesus that involved a healing at the Pool of Siloam. A miracle that happened on the Sabbath, after which Jesus was accused of breaking the Sabbath. But before I can share that story with you, there's just one more thing you need to know about this pool. Owing to its close proximity to the temple, this pool was used for ritual cleansing of all the visitors who came to the temple. Now, there is no instruction in the Bible about performing such rituals before coming to the temple. Such cleansings were required in the Old Testament law for the priests, but not for the populace. But in Jesus' day, the Jews required all who were visiting the sacred temple to go through the ritual cleansing. Here's the story in John chapter 9. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, saying, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night's coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent, the pool of scent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, is not this he who sat and begged? Some said, this is he. Others said, he's like him. He said, I'm he. Therefore they said to him, how are your eyes open? So he answered and said, a man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and I received sight. Then they said to him, where is he? He said, I don't know. They brought him who formerly was blind to the Pharisees. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight, and he said to them, he put clay on my eyes, and I wash, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such things? And there was a division among them. Good question, right? How can a man who is a sinner do such things? So today, I want to look into the statement the Jews made of Jesus. This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. What did Jesus do to lead them to reach such a conclusion? And this is where the story becomes very interesting. There were several Sabbath regulations that most people today reading the Bible don't know about. There were 39 regulations that Jews formed to prevent people from breaking the Sabbath. It was these rules that Jesus broke. But did Jesus break the Sabbath? Well, based on several verses in the Bible, we would have to conclude, no, of course not, because he himself told us, I did not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill. And the Sabbath was very much a part of that law. It is the fourth of the 10 Commandments. Remember what he told John the Baptist when he came to be baptized by him, and John was reluctant to do it. Do you remember that story? Do you recall what he told John to persuade him to baptize him? He told him, it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness. So it was always Jesus' goal to fulfill all righteousness. He never strived to be good enough for heaven, or to try to tip the scales between his evil deeds and his good deeds and hope the good deeds outweighed the evil ones. He was always about fulfilling all righteousness, never doing evil, only doing righteousness. Others said of Jesus, he was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Peter tells us he was the spotless Lamb of God in 1 Peter 1:19. Paul says of Jesus in 2 Corinthians 5:21, he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. And in Isaiah it was prophesied that the Messiah would do no violence, nor would any deceit be found in his mouth. So you get the point. There were a lot of witnesses willing to set the record straight concerning the habits of Jesus. Jesus never sinned, not once, not in any way, not in thought or word or action, never once. Now, let's add to this understanding about Jesus' righteous record to John's definition of what sin is. He says, whoever commits sin transgresses the law, for sin is the transgression of the law. So sin is breaking God's law. And if Jesus never sinned, then he never actually broke God's law. So the Jews were not exactly correct in saying Jesus broke the Sabbath. Now, having taken this excursion away from our story at the pool of Siloam to arrive at this understanding, let's now return to that story. What did Jesus do in this story to lead the Jews to conclude that Jesus broke the Sabbath? If he never broke God's law, then how did he break the Sabbath? To find that answer, we are going to have to do a little digging. Let's take a closer look at what Jesus did in John chapter 9, verses 6, 7, and 11. Here are the verses. When Jesus had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. And verse 11 adds how the man described his experience with Jesus to others. "A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, 'Go to the pool of Siloam and wash.' So I went and washed, and I received sight." Now, there are several things going on here in the background that would lead a Jew of the first century to conclude that Jesus broke the Sabbath when he healed this blind man. First, Jesus spat on the ground. This was strictly forbidden because the Jews believed that one's saliva might land on a blade of grass and thus irrigate the grass. Irrigating on the Sabbath was considered work, and thus one of the 39 forms of work that was forbidden on the Sabbath. So Jesus, strike one. Second, Jesus made clay. According to those same 39 prohibitions, it was unlawful to make clay on the Sabbath because that would also constitute work, especially for potters, which Jesus obviously was not. Strike two. Third, Jesus met the blind man in a place where the sick and infirm commonly sat begging alms of those entering the temple. In this picture, you see my wife bending over to tie her shoe at the first set of stairs, but it was at the second set of stairs, higher up in the background, that the man sat and begged. And this location of things is important because Jesus told the blind man to go from that spot near the temple to the pool of Siloam to wash. And afterwards, the man returned to the temple. That was just over 3/4 of a mile round trip, in addition to the fact that he had already stopped at the pool for his ritual cleansing on his way to the temple. That would make it over a mile that he had walked that day. Jews of the first century believed that a person could only travel so far on the Sabbath. It was called a Sabbath day's journey. And a Sabbath day's journey was set at 2/3 of a mile, which is less than the distance Jesus told this man to walk on the Sabbath. Jesus' command was clear: go and wash at the pool. Not only did he command this of the blind man, but of those who had to guide him to the pool. So this command he gave would have made the Jews very upset, since it violated another stipulation of theirs concerning the Sabbath day's journey. Strike three. Number 4. And this brings us to another conundrum: washing. Jesus told the blind man to go to the pool and wash. The pool of Siloam was for ritual cleansing only, not for washing. All visitors to Jerusalem had to dip in the pool of Siloam before ascending the road to the temple, except on the Sabbath. You see, no bathing was allowed on the Sabbath. And besides, the pool of Siloam wasn't for healing, even though it was considered the cleanest water in Jerusalem. So, strike 4. Fifth, the text of John says Jesus anointed the man with the clay he had made. Anointing was another of the 39 categories of work that was forbidden on the Sabbath in the rules of the rabbis. Strike 5. And this leads us into Jesus' 6th Sabbath violation. Healers were not allowed to heal people on the Sabbath. This had to do with an ancient belief of theirs called Olam Haba, which had to do with the Messianic world to come. It went like this: there will be no healing in heaven, right? Since there's no sickness or imperfections of any kind there. So if there's no sickness or imperfections, there's not going to be any healing. So we should not participate in healing here on earth on the Sabbath, since the Sabbath was to be a foretaste of heaven. You see how religious they were? Their theorizing about what constituted proper Sabbath observance was so religious. But it violated 2 basic premises of the commandment. 1, the Sabbath was meant to bring rest to the weary. That's what Sabbath means, rest. And 2, the Sabbath was meant to be a blessing to mankind. And we'll get to this point in just a couple minutes. But the Jews were accusing Jesus of breaking the Sabbath while Jesus accused the Jews of making the Sabbath a burden. In all of these 6 instances, did you hear me quote even one scripture to defend the Jews' Sabbath beliefs? Of course you didn't, because the Bible is completely silent on these matters. There are no scriptures that forbid these things. These so-called laws were not God's laws, but man's rules that the Jews had established to supposedly protect the sanctity of the Sabbath. The scholars of the day believed God was too brief in his stipulations regarding the Sabbath, so they helped him out by adding a bunch of extra regulations to instruct people more fully on how they should be keeping the Sabbath properly. And the rulemaking continues to this day, with modern conveniences like electric appliances and gas stoves and furnaces, driving, and on it goes. All these are forbidden because of these stipulations in the law. In all, there are hundreds of such Sabbath regulations in Judaism, but none in the Bible. So when Jesus is accused of violating or breaking the Sabbath, and this happens often in the New Testament, what he is being accused of is disregarding all the man-made rules they had heaped up around the Sabbath. He told a man that he healed of paralysis to pick up his bed and walk on the Sabbath. Well, that violated their rule about carrying loads on the Sabbath. The Bible is very specific about forbidding carrying a load of goods to market on the Sabbath in Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 21 and 22, where it is clearly said that that is work, and which is clearly forbidden by the 4th commandment. What those loads were was the stuff they were bringing to market to sell. But from this passage in Jeremiah, they applied it to carrying anything on the Sabbath. Jews won't even wear a shirt with a pocket on the Sabbath in fear of carrying the lint that may have gathered there. They call that an extra load. Jesus had no time for this kind of nonsense, and he had no qualms about breaking these man-made rules. And for this, they condemned him for breaking the Sabbath and sought to kill him over it. But you see, God had already said everything he needed to regarding the proper observance of the Sabbath in the 4th commandment and in one other location. Let's read how simple God makes Sabbath keeping in the Bible. Exodus 20, verses 8 to 10 reads, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work. You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor the stranger who is within your gates." The Sabbath commandment is simple. Don't work on the 7th day. Keep the day holy. So we don't work, and what are we supposed to do on that day? Anything holy. The commandment says no one in the family is to work. So implied in this command is a requirement to spend the day with your family, if you have one. In Leviticus 23:3, there is one further requirement. Let's see if you can pick it out. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work on it. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings. Did you catch it? This holy convocation, or sacred assembly, as it says in the New International Version, is what we call going to church. Jesus always went to church on the Sabbath. Luke 4 says so. And as his custom was, Jesus went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. It was his custom. He did it every week. He never didn't do this. He was a Sabbath keeper. It was the same for the Apostle Paul. Paul always went to church on Sabbath. It says so in Acts 17:2. Then Paul, as his custom was, went into them and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures. So as you read through Acts, you gather it was the same with all New Testament believers. Over and over again, it mentions them keeping Sabbath. In Luke 23:56, and they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. In all, there are references to 84 Sabbaths being kept in the New Testament after Jesus died on the cross. The New Testament Christians kept the Sabbath, as did God's people from the beginning of time. And it's of particular interest to me that the vast majority of these 84 references are found in the writings of Luke, in both the gospel that bears his name and the book of Acts, which he also wrote. You see, Luke is the only writer in the Bible that wasn't Jewish. He's a Gentile believer. Now, why would this Gentile believer meticulously record account after account after account of New Testament believers, followers of Jesus, Jews and Gentiles alike, going to church on the Sabbath? If it was something only Jews had to do, or if it was done away for everyone after Jesus died on the cross, then why is he doing this? But what does Luke do? He cites 84 separate Sabbaths being kept in the same manner it was to be kept according to the law of the Old Testament. And on the other hand, one cannot find a single verse in all the Bible to suggest the day was changed or ended or was going to change or the manner in which it was supposed to be kept had changed. Nothing of the sort. It is a perpetual covenant, a forever covenant. Now let's get to why this is so. There's something about the Sabbath that is so precious it could never be done away with. And Jesus talks about this in Mark chapter 2, verse 27, when he is introducing the purpose of the Sabbath, the reason God gave the Sabbath to mankind. He said, the Sabbath was made as a blessing to the human race. So God has put a blessing into Sabbath keeping, a blessing that cannot be accessed by any other means. Now today we have honored a team of individuals who has served its community with kindness and helpfulness, with food and provisions, and they have done it to the best of their ability for years and years, and in some cases for decades. Oftentimes, such actions go unnoticed. They don't catch the attention of many, but God notices everything, every kind deed done in his name, every word meant to uplift the disparaging, every benevolent act is noticed by the one who commissioned us to be his hands and feet in the world that has forgotten how to care. And he is the one who has promised, even if we give a cup of water to a thirsty person, our reward will be secure in heaven. He sees everything. And on behalf of the one who will one day say to his faithful doers of good, well done, good and faithful servants, enter into the joy of your Lord. What you have done and what you continue to do makes a world of difference, and it brings pleasure to God. You have been a blessing to your world. Now, let's paint a different picture. Could you imagine what would have happened in the people's lives if you did not do what you did all those weeks, for all those months and years and decades? Where would they be without the blessing you provided them? That is exactly where you would be without the blessing God wants to give you through his Sabbath. You can go through life without the blessing. What I mean to say is, it's possible. But isn't that kind of foolish to say to the Lord that wants to bless you, oh no, thank you, but I don't need your blessing. You do-gooders to the people of Prescott and beyond, how would you feel if the people you are trying to help said to you, oh, I definitely need what you have. I have hungry children at home, 8 mouths to feed, bills to pay, whatever. But I am not going to avail myself to your help. My family is desperately hungry, but I can't accept your kindness. How would that make you feel? Whatever you call that emotion, that is exactly how the Lord feels every time we leave the Sabbath blessing unaccepted. When we crowd that day with everything other than him, when we go anywhere and everywhere except to church, when we leave the blessing behind, the Lord is like, but I have a blessing just for you. A blessing we will never know until we partake in the Sabbath. The man was born blind to this blessing in John chapter 9, but he found it when he obeyed the commands of Jesus. He went to the pool and washed and received his sight again on the Sabbath. When he went to the temple that day, he wasn't seeking this. He was seeking money, food, eking out a meager existence. What Jesus gave him was a blessing so great it changed his life forever. Not only could he see clearly on that Sabbath, things he was once blind to all his life, but he found something most Jews missed. Jesus in that Sabbath. He found love and joy, freedom from the thought that God didn't care, a whole new life and a host of other blessings because he found in this things he was supposed to do a blessing waiting for him that only Jesus could do. That is what the Sabbath is all about. The Jews had kept the Sabbath all their life, but only few of them found Jesus in the Sabbath. Doesn't it make you wonder what miracles await you, what blessings await you if you will hear the words of Jesus today and do them? If you found him hiding in plain sight every seventh day of the week, ready to pounce on you with another truckload of blessings, ready to bless, ready to lift your burdens, ready to change your life forever, you may not have expected this message when you came to this site today, but it comes right from Jesus himself, spoken not just to the people of his day, but to us all here today. Jesus not only changed this blind man's view of the pool of Siloam forever, not only did he change his view of the Sabbath forever, but it changed his view of Jesus forever, because now he could truly see. God bless you all as your sight is restored to you to truly see what you may have missed your whole life before this moment with Jesus. Until next week, God bless you with Sabbath blessings.